The EPA sucks. There. I said what we were all thinking. Starting in the early 70s, the agency's concerted push to choke the power out of American performance cars sent our favorite cars into a desperate tailspin of low power. The Z28 Camaro was down to just 185 horsepower by 1979. And the Mustang, well, that was making just about 140 horsepower. These were dark times to be a gearhead, but not all hope was lost. In the middle of the Arizona desert, a future governor and two of his sons had cooked up an ingenious way to skate these EPA regulations through a hilariously simple loophole and bring serious power back into the hands of those customers who wanted it. And they would do that with their very own specially hopped up Pontiac Trans Ams that they called the Macho TAs. And as far as new cars went in 1979, you would be hard-pressed to ever find one of these Trans Ams that saw a set of taillights. So how did two brothers end up building the only cars with real muscle that you could buy in the late 70s? Well, because they were raised like that. Their father was a man by the name of Evan Meechum, an ex-World War II fighter pilot and Purple Heart recipient who started a Pontiac and Rambler dealership in Phoenix, Arizona in his mid-20s post-World War II. Now, funny enough, Evan would go on to eventually become the governor of Arizona and also become the only governor in that state to ever get impeached, as well as the first governor ever to face an impeachment trial, a recall election, and a felony indictment at the same time. But that is a story for a different type of channel. Two of Evan's sons, Kyle and Dennis, worked within the family business, and as such, they were gearheads by nature. Pontiac's muscle car heyday with the GTO and the launch of the Super Duty Trans Ams was something that the Meechum family remembered quite well, and the subsequent neutering of all Pontiac's available performance offerings in the late 70s just didn't sit right with them. But on the outside, it didn't seem like they could do anything about it. The Meechum family dealership was an official Pontiac dealer, which the EPA prohibited from selling new cars with any modifications that were not certified by the EPA. All the cars that Meechum Pontiac sold had to be as they were drivetrain-wise from the factory. This meant that they could not give these cars that Baldwin Motion type treatment of the past, until they figured out an ingenious loophole. While Meechum Pontiac couldn't sell new Pontiacs, they could sell their brand new Trans Ams to a separate company that the two sons set up called DKM. Once DKM would take possession of these Trans Ams, they would be titled, and as such, they would no longer be considered new cars. Even if they had 0 miles on them. Once they were titled, in the eyes of the law at the time, they were no longer subject to the same regulatory oversight. The Meechum boys cracked the code and were now able to sell hopped-up Trans Ams to willing buyers, something that no one else could do. And yes, for those of you thinking, how ironic that the guy who potentially worked with his sons to skate EPA regulations also eventually got impeached when he became governor. I also had this realization when I was writing this. Nonetheless, now that they figured out the loophole, it was time to start building what DKM, which was short for Dennis and Kyle Meechum, would call the Macho Trans Am. Starting in 1977, they would order from the dealership brand new Trans Ams equipped with the W72/L78 package, which was the 200 horsepower performance package for the Pontiac 400 motor. DKM would then rejet the carburetor for better performance, recurve the distributor, fit a set of hooker headers, and convert the Y-pipe 2-into-1 exhaust back into a true dual system with better flowing mufflers. In switching to a true dual exhaust, they also added a second catalytic converter to the system so that all the exhaust gas wasn't funneled through one inefficient converter. They also modified the car's hood scoop to make it functional for sucking in cold air. Internally, the motors remained unopened to keep reliability high and to keep costs down. With just the modifications I mentioned though, DKM was able to squeeze about 50 horsepower more out of these Trans Ams, thus bumping peak power to 250 horsepower in 1977. And that was just the base version of the Macho Trans Am. The next year, in 1978, DKM went all out and introduced an all-new range-topping drivetrain combo. That same better-breathing Pontiac 400 now fitted with a draw-through turbocharger, courtesy of high-output specialties with added water injection. With these turbo cars, overall power was now right at 330 horsepower, which for 1978 wasn't just a lot. It was getting up there with the Aston Martin V8 Vantage and Lamborghini Countach in terms of some of the most powerful factory offerings in the world. Pair that with DKM's newly offered 5-speed Doug Nash manual transmission, and the extra gear gave these turbo machos way more potential, albeit only when they were running right. See, early draw-through turbo systems like the one on this car were known for being a bit less than reliable in pretty much every application. And speaking of application, up until this point in explaining the Macho Trans Ams, you might be thinking that these cars were just one-trick ponies built for straight-line speed. Well, one-trick chickens in this case. But the Macho Trans Ams were actually a much more complete package than all that. All of these cars got the equivalent of the Trans Am WS6 handling package, which gave it a better steering box, 342 rear gears, and different suspension. DKM would further overhaul this setup by installing new Koni adjustable shocks at all four corners, lowering springs, and they set the cars up on wider WS6 8-inch wheels. There were other small options that could be changed around on the Macho cars, like Recaro seats, a Hurst short throw shifter, a custom hood, and a few other extraneous mods to personalize your Macho Trans Am to your liking. When it came to pricing, the base Macho cars came in at a $3,200 premium over the stock Trans Am, which was already knocking on the door of $6,000, which meant that your Macho Trans Am would have started at $9,200. And if you wanted the turbo, you would need to throw another $3,000 their way with a $12,000 plus Trans Am. Both of these cars were deep into new Corvette price territory, but performance-wise, they trounced the Corvettes. The non-turbo Macho Trans Ams were low 14-second cars in the quarter mile, which made them nearly a second faster than the top dog L82 Vettes. Some people would think it's crazy to choose a Trans Am over a Corvette, but when you look at the numbers, I don't think the people that bought these were crazy at all. These were faster than a Vette, handled nearly as well, were more exclusive, more practical, and just plain cool. From 1978 to 1980, about 325 people were those who were crazy enough to order their own Macho Trans Am, with about 20 of those being the turbo-equipped 5-speed cars. The body style of the second-gen Firebird and Trans Am was carried on through 1981, but by 1980, the Pontiac 400 was phased out in favor of the 301, which was just much harder to squeeze power out of. The DKM treatment that they were giving the 400s just wouldn't have the same effect on the 301 cars, and as such, they discontinued the Macho Trans Am in 1980. The Meechums would continue modifying Trans Ams once the third-gen Firebirds rolled around with their handling-focused Motorsport Edition Trans Ams, which were still an improvement over the stock cars, but they lacked that insane rebellious spirit that made the Macho cars so unique for the era. They weren't just fast for the period, they were also a middle finger to the regulatory body that destroyed the muscle car. The story of these Macho TAs is absolutely one of my favorites, right up there with the convicted killer who built the GT40 clones, which if you haven't watched that video, it'll be linked here. But that wraps up their story. So thank you all for making it to the end of the video and watching the content I put out. Please make sure to like the video and turn on notifications for our future uploads. It really helps me out. But otherwise, I will see you all next time, enthusiasts.